please welcome Janet Mock and Ryan Murphy with the West Coast editor of Time, Sam Lansky.
Hi, girl. Congratulations. Hi, everyone. How's your Time 100 Summit? Great. Hey, guys. Thank you so much for joining me.
Of course.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to have you here. 2 Time 100 honorees with us. Janet, I wanted to open with a quote from you. Actually, it's from your best-selling book, Redefining Realness, which is a great read. If you haven't read it, highly recommend it. So you wrote in that book, "I believe that telling our stories first to ourselves and then to one another and the world is a revolutionary act." Why was it important for you to tell your story?
Oh, God. When I first stepped forward with my story was in 2011. I was working as an editor at People. And at that point, there was so, this rash of, LGBT harassment and suicides largely around youth. And I felt that I was holding on to a truth that I kept so closely held. And I felt a part of me, kind of was hiding behind very famous people's stories in order to kind of shield myself. And at 12 years old, I came out as trans. And so why not, at that point at 26, decide to step forward with my truth and be impactful and to create an image that I hadn't grown up with, as a young girl transitioning, as a young girl trying to figure out who I was, and to give other young girls growing up who kind of feel like they're not centered or heard or deserving of space, give them an affirming image that they could look to and to see. And so that's why I stepped forward and shared my truth, which changed my life.
Ryan, are there parts of your own story that have made their way into your own work, whether it's specific shows or films or characters, where it feels like it really is a kind of reflection of you?
Yeah, I think everything, because I was a very weird child in that I was popular and picked on. So those energies are very bizarre. So I think in all of my work, I'm very interested in the underdog, the person who's not seen, the person who wants to burst forth. And I'm also interested in ambition. So I think if you look at all of my work, from Glee to American Horror Story to OJ to Versace to most recently with Pose, I think they all have that idea of I want to be seen and I'm willing to risk being knocked down. I'm not going to give up. Personally, I would say the most personal story I think that I ever wrote was in the first season of Glee with the Kurt Hummel character and his father. But that was the version that I wanted to have happen. The father love him and accept him and defend him. And my father was dying in that time and has since passed away. So I was sort of fixing a wound, I think, in my work at that time.
This panel is called Telling Stories That Matter, and I think both of you are so extraordinary at telling stories that really matter to a lot of people. What do you think are the stories that matter right now in the world? What are the most sort of urgent and crucial stories that need to be told?
Well, I sort of feel that if you're not writing about women or gender or race, you're not writing. I sort of feel like those are the stories that people want to talk about. Those are the stories that are finally bubbling up to the surface. There's a lot of new talent that are finally being allowed to tell those stories. And there's a real cultural shift, I think, particularly in Hollywood, where I'm based. There's just a hunger for an illumination of the other. And the other has been trying to burst out since I started writing for television, which was 1998. And it was always the thing that was tamped down, and I think it's finally exploded out, and it feels like a freedom to me.
But, I think it's always, so the content that I love so much is oftentimes going into worlds that I'm unfamiliar with. I grew up like so many people, my childhood heroine largely was like Felicity and Claire Danes on My So-Called Life, right? So we kind of know what those worlds are, even though then, you know, they kind of are the universal narrative. And so when we are able to bring that same format into the lives of someone who's different. And so we're telling a Cinderella story on Pose, right? The first season, Blanca's journey from being, you know, the kind of, you know, the stumped on, you know, underdog who is diagnosed with HIV and therefore launches her to want to build a legacy in a home that lasts far beyond her. Right, so it's the universal story that we're all very used to, but then you're also telling it in a different way by centering, as Ryan said, which is the DNA of so many of his shows. You're centering those who are often always watching from the margins. And so instead of, you know, kind of having the center here and they're here, we move the camera this way, and this becomes the center and the world and the universe. And so for me, I'm always interested in stories that kind of link us in those ways. And I've seen so many, you know, always so surprised when I see messages or, you know, from mothers who look to our show and they're like, no, this is just like a matriarchy. This show is about these powerful mothers who take in these misfit kids who will sacrifice everything, every bone in their body, every last penny to invest in the dreams of their children. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know that that's what we were doing. But it's so interesting that people come to you in that way and bring themselves to the narrative. And so to me, that's always like a great bridge is what stories can do. They can build a bridge between the likenesses between us.
Janet, I remember seeing you last year. I don't know if you remember this, but you'd been working on Pose, and I hadn't seen you in a while. And I asked how it was going, and I was like, "Are you consulting on the show?" And you very politely but confidently said, "No, I'm writing and producing and directing." And it was a great reminder for me, not to underestimate you, but never something to do. But I would love to hear about your journey from kind of author and activist and journalist to where you are now, and also, you know, the role that you played in that, Ryan.
Well, I thought that I would, when Ryan requested a meeting with me with the summer of 2017, I was just looking to have a cute little paycheck to consult and then to keep on doing what I was doing. And after a 30-minute meeting, Ryan was like, yeah, you should move to LA and leave the world of books and come work with me in TV. And I was like, wait, what? Like, did I just get hired? And so I had the same thoughts that you had in terms of the ambition. And so I think that it just speaks largely to Ryan's ability to see something, at least as my mentor, to see something in me long before I could see it, and to have the courage and creativity to see that at this cultural moment for the show that he was creating and working on, that he knew he needed someone who lived it to help helm it. And I think that that's a shift in what's happening in the industry, is that no longer is it okay for someone who's so dominant to come in and just tell the stories of the marginalized, but you need to bring them on as collaborators. And so for me, writing in the genre, you know, of screenwriting or TV wasn't that much of a leap. I had to learn final draft, you know, do it in a different format. Learn that, you know, my big old speeches aren't always necessary at times. And to figure out ways to be collaborative from the start, because filmmaking is that. You know, you sit in a writer's room, you sit in a room, and there's nothing there except the experiences that you share, and you swap that back and forth, and that becomes the threads of the stories that you tell over, you know, 8 episodes. And then from there, the scariest I was when he told me that I would be directing episode 6, which was Love is the Message, which was kind of our
It's an extraordinary hour of television. If you haven't watched it, it's really remarkable.
Yeah, and when he told me that I was doing that, I just was like, wait, me? Directing? Like, we're writing that's fine, but to direct it, it felt so outside of what my image of myself was. Because anyone that I saw as a director, largely, there weren't that many Ava DuVernays that you can point to, right? And so to even think that I would be given the helm, to be the person to sit there, to call the shots, to make the quick decisions, to call the literal shots, was overwhelming. And so if it wasn't for Ryan's push and support, I don't think that I would have ever thought that I was able or capable of doing that. And for it to now be, you know, deemed like the #1 episode of television last year is crazy making to me.
And my decision to do that with Janet was simple, because within the the first 30 seconds, I just recognized that she was super bossy. And I was like, I remember being that person too. But yeah, it was the greatest thing in my life now is I'm 54 years old, I have 2 kids who were toddlers, and when I started out in the business, which was in the mid-90s, you know, I really hungered for a mentor. I wanted somebody to take me under their wing and talk to me about the business side of it and how to direct and what is that about. And I felt unchosen because I was gay and different, and it always stung me. And I remember how hard it was to navigate the system. So when I got some success, one of the first things that I wanted to do was to be a mentor to people who could change the system and make it very different, particularly in television. You know, when I was coming up, it was the Bochco, David Milch world. It was very straight, it was very white, it was very 50s, everybody wore Dockers on the set, it's just what it was. and I felt, the first time I directed, it was me and 100 straight men in their 50s, and I felt like an alien in my own world. So I just have always been very conscious of the idea of new voices and new stars, and Janet is clearly a star. And I just saw that she could do it, and she did, with very little guidance. And I think the hardest thing in the world now is, you know, opportunity. And a lot of times you don't get opportunity because you don't have the experience. It's just you have to be thrown in and have somebody say, no, you can do it, in a way that I didn't feel that I had. So that's by and far the best thing that I get to do now.
I want to talk about your recent move to Netflix, Ryan, which I think it was being a little bit of a paradigm-shifting deal in the world of television for a creator. Can you tell me about making the leap from where you were at 20th Century Fox for many years over to Netflix in what I think Deadline said was the biggest TV pact ever? I don't know if that's true or not, but...
It was the hardest thing I've ever done and the easiest thing I've ever done, because I sort of feel like we live in a world now where if you can create content, there is a world for you to be rewarded for it in a big way. And I was sort of at Fox, and I was doing a lot of television, and I loved that. But what I was interested in, and why I made the move, was because I wanted to tell different stories. I wanted to move into documentaries, I wanted to do movies. So they provide that in that ecosystem. And they're also not interested in being babysitters of talent. They bet on people, they let you make your own decisions, and they treat you like an adult, which I have loved. So this coming July will be my first anniversary there, and within that year I think I've set up and have green lights for 10 different projects. I have 3 documentaries coming out, I have 4 television shows, and I have 3 movies. And I think that it's a volume business, to be sure, but it's also a way that I can put things into the world that I believe in. And every one of them has that DNA, and I believe in that idea that your work should sum up your value system in some weird way. And I was interested in a world where I could have all of my stuff contained, almost like a mini studio within a studio, Netflix being the big umbrella. So it's been very liberating, and within that, they've also given me this tremendous opportunity to, and they want new, young voices. They don't want the same. They want to break the rules. So the question is, well, how do you break the rules? You break the rules with the talent you bring up, and you break the rules by how you're telling those stories. And you know, it used to be everything that was a drama had to be 60 minutes and that's it. But now, you know, you can do 15-minute episode. You can just sort of circumvent the form, and I've loved that a great deal. And you know, and I still also have my shows at Fox, so I sort of got the best of both worlds, I think. But I was very nervous about it, because it was a hard moment for me to sort of put a value on what your worth is. And I think a lot of people who have grown up being minorities are used to just taking what they throw at you right away, because you're in the, I just want to be in the game, I want to be in the game. And this was an example where I was able to say what I felt my worth was, and then it was met, and I was astonished. But it was a great moment for me. I didn't feel like that picked on kid anymore.
That's
You know?
good.
Yeah.
You've both been kind of trailblazers in representation in the stories you've told about yourselves, about other people, separately, together. With all of the progress that's been made in representation and inclusion in the entertainment industry, what do you think are the big obstacles ahead? What do you think the path forward looks like from here?
I always felt that the obstacle for me was not so much the people that I was working with, but the people who had the green light power. You know, it was a certain idea that success could only be seen in one way. And to be blunt, I think that there's just a whole new, I always say that I never changed, the executives changed. And I think in my world now, there's so many more women in power, there's so many more minorities in power, and they're the ones doing the green light. Pretty much, they're the ones making the decisions, and they're interested in putting on television, particularly stories that were not available to them growing up, and that's been the big shift, I think, in the executive ranks. So I don't think there are any obstacles anymore. I really don't, other than continuing to bring more people into the tent, and continuing to take chances on programming is my big thing. And my experience at Netflix has been full steam ahead, so I sort of feel like that victory will continue in a weird way.
Well, I think we all know the conversations with Time's Up and Me Too movement and the idea, not the idea, but the reality of, sexual harassment in the workplace and gender equity and pay equity. I think that all of those things are necessary things that the industry has to fight with. I think also making sure that, and what has been so powerful as an exhibition on Pose is that not only do we have people of color and LGBT people and low-income folk on television, but then behind the scene, off screen, you also have making sure that it's fueled by choreographers and grips and gaffers and writers and directors who resemble those people who come from those experiences. If you look at a lot of these sets, you can go to any set, even if they're POC sets, the crew doesn't reflect oftentimes the people on screen, and so that's where a lot of the change has to also happen. On our show, what has been so great is the fact that Ryan has been unapologetic about that, of crafting that. In his world, it's all, there's no obstacles. You just do it. It's that easy. It's simple.
Although I do struggle, I'm always like, where are the female grips?
Yeah.
We need more grips. I mean, it's that.
No,
that's, and
yeah.
I think that that's an area where you go to film schools, and a lot of younger people are like, well, I didn't know I could be that. So that is the shift in changing people's mindset, which is, you can be that now, and we want you to be that. That is true, and I do think that
and
is
drivers,
a
and there's so much that fuels a set and a show, and so making sure that you're inclusive all the way through, not just through the actors you have on screen, but then also behind the camera.
But I also know that I live in a completely bizarre world because, with that responsibility comes a great degree of power, and I've always said, I'm not interested in living in the real world. I'm interested in living in the world that I want to live in. So I feel like in my work with my crews, I'm able to shift that. And I believe in leading by example, but I know that it's hard, and I know that it's been slow to change.
And then also 3 of the most powerful people in television is a gay man, another gay man, Ray Berlanti, and Shonda Rhimes. And so that in itself speaks of the shift in paradigm on who, if we're saying that, in Hollywood TV is everything, and we're in the Gilded Age of it, and that the people who are running it and telling the most impactful stories are coming from communities that have often not been centered, at least in, the coming up of what television has used to be.
I think it's a worthy change and an overdue one. That's all the time we have. From here, I think we are going to lunch. There's food available in the foyer. As you can see, the scale of this event has exceeded all of our expectations. So should you encounter food lines, we hope you'll use that time to network with your fellow attendees. And we'll reconvene here at 1:00 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.